Okay, let's go over some basic upper body climbing techniques. And these will be all pulling motions, so that's why I classified them into one group so we can kind of distinguish between pushing and pulling, because we're going to use different muscles based on the different types of climbing moves. And these are the more common moves that you're going to use for the upper body. Now, they are used in conjunction with the lower body, but we're going to talk about side pulls, Gaston, laybacking, and undercling. So let's start with laybacking real quick. So this is when you have straight arms and you're normally inside of a crack, and you may even have a corner, and you're keeping those arms straight and you're kind of laying back and using opposing forces. So you've got your handhold position using those pulling muscles, and then you're kind of pressing into the footholds with your feet. So you want opposing forces. That would be a layback. And then you have undercling position. So you're still using opposing forces, so you'll still use your feet to help lift you, but the undercling is typically used, not in every case, but typically used to keep your hips close to the wall. So you may be reaching out and you need to, instead of using like a standard grip on the top or side of a hold like you would with side pulls, Gastons, and your typical hand position on the pulling motion, you're going underneath the hold. So the hand is upside down so that you can reach for another hold and use your feet. So you're still pushing with the feet while pulling on the hold. But the hand position's different than it is in laybacking, in that you're reaching below the bottom of the hold. And I have videos on all of these that you can kind of watch. So side pulls, think of arms outreached and you're pulling on two holds. So you're pulling in towards your body, but your arms are extended, reaching out. You can keep them slightly bent and move back and forth, but the handhold position would be on the grip away from the body. So it's on the grip on the opposite side of the handhold away from the body, and you'll see that in the video as well. Now, Gaston, this is pretty easy to think of compared to a side pull. So compare these two. It's just the opposite, the inverse of a side pull. Think of trying to open up an elevator. In fact, I'll write that in. Like if you were trying to open up an elevator door and you had to stick your hands in that small crack and then pull it apart. So that would be what you would envision. So opening up an elevator door would be a good example or a good visual of a Gaston. If you watch these videos, it'll show you the difference between a side pull, a Gaston, and undercling. So you can go in and watch Zach demonstrate all those different positions. Another upper body technique that can also be used, or also use those pulling muscles, is palming. So we've talked about smearing with the feet by dropping the heels. This is the upper body version of smearing. So you're using the surface area of your hand to get on a flat surface, and you're using the friction from your hand to climb, but you're using those pulling muscles in conjunction with the smearing from your feet, or maybe you have your feet on foot chips, but your hands are using the surface area from there to create friction and climb. And here's an example of palming. So there's a palming video. Now let's talk a little bit about the muscles that are going to be used with these different pulling activities. So on anterior view, let's just talk about the upper body for a sec, since that's what we're focused on. Your biceps is a pulling muscle. A lot of the muscles in your forearm are a pulling muscle. So the anterior view of a person, or those anterior major muscle groups, don't have a lot of pulling actions. They tend to be pushing in nature. Like if we looked at the anterior portion of the deltoid, that's a pushing muscle. If we looked at the pectoralis major, that's a pushing muscle. So a lot of the muscles that you can see in anterior view, like the quadriceps, if we wanted to look at the lower body, that is a pushing muscle. Now, the rectus abdominis is a pulling muscle, so that's one of your core, which actually causes your core to contract, and you are shortening those muscles when you do a sit-up, so those are pulling muscles as well. Now, if we look at posterior view and we talk about the upper body muscles, we've got the posterior deltoid. So most of your back muscles are pulling muscles. That's why climbers have really developed back muscles. So the posterior deltoid, which is on the opposite side, is actually a pulling muscle. Your triceps is a pushing muscle. So when you do like bench press, or when we start talking about mantling, that is one of the muscles that you would use on the posterior side. But your latissimus dorsi, your trapezius, even some of the deeper muscles like the rhomboids, the teres major, teres minor, all of those back muscles are pushing muscles. All the ones that are pulling muscles, that I just mentioned. Your gluteus maximus tends to be more of a pushing muscle, like if you were going to do squats and lunges, or you were lifting yourself up the wall with the leg bent at a right angle, and then you use that to lift yourself up. So that's the reason people do squats and lunges, to work out their gluteus maximus. And then you have the hamstring. Now, the hamstring is a pulling muscle. So if we were doing something like a heel hook, you're using the hamstring. So the gastrocnemius tends to be more of a pushing muscle. And now let's just talk about the different muscles in the upper body. The ones that we primarily want to be concerned about for these activities that we just talked about, the gaston, the side pulls, all the different ones like palming that we just mentioned under clings, would be latissimus dorsi, biceps, trapezius, posterior deltoid. Now, there are others, like the rhomboids, are a deeper muscle that you can't see. I'm just going to talk about most of the major muscle groups you would see if you took like a weight training course, so you could compare the two. Most activity courses only mention like the superficial muscles, the muscles you can see right underneath the skin. They don't really talk too much about the deeper muscles. And those will be the ones of main concern. Now, latissimus dorsi, that's posterior. Biceps, that's going to be anterior. Trapezius is more of a posterior muscle, even though you can see a portion of it from the anterior view, but it's a back muscle. Posterior deltoid is also a pulling muscle. And you could list teres major, teres minor, all those other ones are all involved. But those are definitely used for the gaston, the side pulls, the underclings, and the palming, all those different activities that we mentioned above, lay backing, all of those would use those pulling muscles. So I want to keep this short. I just want to kind of give you some knowledge base on the different muscles and that correspond to the different upper body pulling techniques that we would use in climbing.